Death at the Seance. A Hercule Poirot Mystery Part 1. The invitation. Hercule Poirot was not a man who welcomed surprises. Yet it was a surprise that arrived on a damp London morning which set in motion the strange affair later known as Death at the Seance. The little Belgian sat at the small round table in his flat, carefully aligning his breakfast tray so that every object rested in perfect symmetry. The teacup handle faced precisely 3 o'clock. The spoon lay parallel to the edge of the saucer. Order, Poirot believed, was the foundation of clear thinking. A sharp knock disturbed this harmony. Poirot frowned. He did not expect visitors before 11. Another knock followed, more insistent. Rising with a sigh, he opened the door to find a young messenger boy holding an envelope of heavy cream-colored paper, sealed with dark purple wax. "For Monsieur Poirot," the boy said, tipping his cap. Poirot accepted the envelope with care, examining the seal before closing the door. The wax bore an unfamiliar symbol, an eye encircled by stars. Curious, very curious. He returned to the table, sat, and opened the letter with a silver knife reserved for such purposes. "Madame Celestine humbly requests the honor of your presence at a private séance to be held this Thursday evening at her residence in Bloomsbury. Matters of great importance, both spiritual and earthly, require your unique insight." Poirot's eyebrows rose. A séance, spirits, ghosts, voices from beyond. He sniffed. "Mon ami," he murmured to himself. "There are no spirits who can deceive Hercule Poirot. Only humans, and humans are far more interesting." The letter continued, listing the names of the invited guests. Poirot read them slowly, his expression changing from mild amusement to sharp interest. Sir Alistair Hawthorne, Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, Miss Violet Kerr, Mr. Edmund Blake, Colonel Rupert Vane. Poirot leaned back. He knew these names. Not personally, perhaps, but reputations have a way of traveling. Sir Alistair Hawthorne was a wealthy industrialist with fingers in shipping, coal, and steel. A man admired in public, whispered about in private. Lawsuits, broken partnerships, rumors of cruelty hidden behind charm. Why, Poirot wondered, would such people gather around a table to summon the dead? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Hastings, who entered with his usual cheer. "Good morning, Poirot. You look as though you've discovered a new species of beetle." Poirot handed him the letter. "A séance," Hastings exclaimed. "Capital stuff. Ghosts, rapping tables, eerie voices. Quite thrilling." Poirot smiled thinly. "You see excitement, mon ami. I see disorder. And where there is disorder, there is often crime." Thursday evening arrived, cloaked in fog. Poirot stood before Madame Celestine's residence, a tall townhouse looming like a silent observer. The windows glowed faintly, filtered through heavy curtains. The street itself seemed hushed, as though the city held its breath. Inside, the air was thick with incense. Heavy drapes muffled sound, and lamps cast long, trembling shadows across velvet walls. Madame Celestine greeted Poirot warmly, a tall woman with dramatic features, dark eyes, and fingers heavy with rings. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and theatrical, "the spirits have spoken of you." Poirot bowed slightly. "They should be careful, Madame. I listen only to facts." One by one, the guests arrived. Sir Alistair Hawthorne entered with confidence, his silver hair immaculate, his smile practiced. Lady Hawthorne followed, pale and distant, her eyes darting nervously. Poirot noted the tension between them, space that could not be bridged by politeness alone. Miss Violet Kerr appeared next, young and striking, her hands clasped too tightly. Edmund Blake, sharp-eyed and restless, avoided Sir Alistair's gaze. Colonel Vane arrived last, stiff-backed and silent, carrying the weight of old military discipline. Poirot observed them all, filing away details. The slight tremor in Lady Hawthorne's hand, the flash of resentment in Blake's eyes, the faint smell of bitter almonds lingering near Sir Alistair, a detail Poirot would not forget. They were ushered into the séance room, a circular chamber with a round table at its center. Candles flickered, chairs were arranged with careful precision. Madame Celestine spoke solemnly. "Tonight, the veil is thin. Speak only truth. The spirits punish deception." Poirot sat, folding his hands. Around him, nervous breaths and forced calm mingled in the darkness. As the lights dimmed, Poirot felt the unmistakable tension of human fear. Not fear of ghosts, but fear of exposure, of secrets dragged into the light. He smiled to himself. The spirits, Poirot thought, are not the ones we must fear. Part 2. The circle is formed. The seance room seemed to exist outside ordinary time. Once the heavy door was closed, the noises of London, the distant carriages, the murmuring streets vanished completely, as though the house itself had withdrawn from the living world. Only the low crackle of candle wicks and the soft rustle of fabric disturbed the silence. Hercule Poirot sat very straight in his chair, his feet placed neatly together, his hands folded with precision upon the polished surface of the round table. He disliked discomfort, and the chair was slightly too low for his taste, but he bore it with patience. Discomfort, after all, often revealed truths. It made people restless, and restless people made mistakes. Madame Celestine moved about the room like a priestess preparing a sacred rite. She adjusted candles so that each flame cast long, wavering shadows upon the walls. The shadows overlapped and merged, giving the illusion of movement, faces forming and dissolving in the darkness. Poirot noted this with interest. The mind, he reflected, was eager to see what it expected to see. "Please," Madame Celestine said softly, "place your hands upon the table. We must form a complete circle. The spirits are sensitive to breaks, both physical and emotional." Sir Alistair Hawthorne complied at once, his long fingers resting confidently on the table's edge. Lady Hawthorne hesitated before following suit, her touch light, almost reluctant, as though the wood itself repelled her. Miss Violet Kerr swallowed hard before extending her hands, while Edmund Blake drummed his fingers once quickly before stilling them. Colonel Vane sat rigid, his posture immaculate, his palms flat and disciplined. Poirot watched them all through half-lidded eyes. The circle was complete. Yes, but emotionally, it was fractured in half a dozen places. Madame Celestine took her seat at the head of the table. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, theatrically, allowing the silence to stretch. "We begin," she intoned, "by clearing our minds of earthly concerns." Poirot almost smiled. Earthly concerns were precisely what filled this room. The lamps were extinguished, one by one, until only the candles remained. Their light was insufficient, plunging the corners of the room into deep shadow. The air felt heavier now, thick with incense and anticipation. Someone, Poirot suspected, Miss Kurt, took a sharp breath. Madame Celestine began to chant. The words were low and rhythmic, spoken in a language Poirot recognized as a crude mixture of Latin and phonetic nonsense. He approved. In a way, nonsense was often more effective than truth when one wished to impress. The table gave a faint tremor. Miss Kerr gasped. Poirot did not move. He felt the vibration, clearly felt, too, its direction, not from below, as one might expect if some mechanical device were involved, but laterally, a pressure applied unevenly by human hands. "Do not be afraid," Madame Celestine murmured. "The spirits draw near." Sir Alistair chuckled softly. "Extraordinary," he said. "Quite extraordinary." Poirot filed away the tone of amusement. Sir Alistair Hawthorne did not believe in spirits. That much was clear. The chanting grew louder. Madame Celestine's voice rose and fell, weaving an atmosphere of tension and reverence. Poirot became acutely aware of small details: the faint squeak of a chair leg, the uneven breathing of the guests, the subtle shift of weight as someone adjusted their posture. Then came the knock, rap, sharp, distinct, unmistakable. But Miss Kerr cried out, her hands tightening on the table. "Who speaks to us?" Madame Celestine asked dramatically. Rap. Rap. Poirot noted the delay between question and response. "Too precise, too deliberate. Is it a spirit bound to this house?" Madame Celestine continued. Silence. Poirot's gaze flicked briefly to Colonel Vane. The colonel's jaw was clenched, his face pale. Not fear, Poirot judged, but anger or restraint. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, or perhaps, Poirot reflected, the suggestion of cold was enough to make people feel it. Madame Celestine suddenly stiffened. They are gathering, she whispered. Many voices, confused voices. The candles flickered violently, though no breeze touched Poirot's cheek. Sir Alistair leaned forward slightly. Ask them, he said, why they have come. Poirot found this interesting. Sir Alistair, the skeptic, was suddenly engaged, curious. Madame Celestine obeyed. Her chant shifted, becoming sharper, more urgent. The knocking resumed. 3 raps in quick succession. Miss Kerr began to tremble openly. Poirot felt the faintest brush against his shoe beneath the table. He did not react. He merely noted the direction and pressure. A foot extended cautiously. Someone was testing the darkness. Do the spirits bring a warning? Madame Celestine asked. The response came swiftly. Rap a single, emphatic blow. Lady Hawthorne let out a small, strangled sound. Poirot turned his head slightly, watching her profile. Her fear was genuine, of that he was certain. But fear of what? Of death, or of revelation? Madame Celestine's voice dropped to a whisper. They speak of betrayal, she said, of secrets kept too long. Edmund Blake shifted sharply in his chair. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Parlor tricks and suggestion. Yet his voice betrayed him. It was tight, strained. Madame Celestine ignored him. One among us, she continued, stands in great danger. Sir Alistair laughed again, louder this time. Danger from ghosts? Hardly. Poirot smelled it again, that faint, bitter almond scent. It drifted past him briefly, then vanished. Interesting. The chanting ceased abruptly. Darkness thickened. Poirot sensed movement, controlled, purposeful. The table trembled more violently now, as though gripped by unseen hands. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else stifled a sob. Then silence. Absolute, oppressive silence. Madame Celestine spoke. Her voice altered, deeper. The spirits withdraw. The circle must remain unbroken. Poirot felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple, not from fear, but from concentration. Every instinct told him that this performance, however theatrical, was designed to distract. Distract from what? The candles flared suddenly, burning brighter than before. Poirot blinked. Sir Alistair Hawthorne slumped forward. For a moment, no one spoke. The image did not register fully, as though the mind refused to accept it. Then Lady Hawthorne screamed. The circle shattered. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Miss Kerr leaped to her feet, sobbing. Edmund Blake stared in horror. Poirot rose more slowly. He stepped to Sir Alistair's side, placing 2 fingers gently against the man's neck. He needed no confirmation. Sir Alistair Hawthorne was dead. Poirot straightened, his face grave. So, he murmured to himself, the spirits have spoken yet, but it is not they who have killed. Part 3. The impossible death. For several seconds after Lady Hawthorne's scream, the room remained suspended in chaos, sound without sense, motion without direction. Chairs lay overturned, candles guttered violently, and shadows leaped like frightened animals across the walls. The seance, which moments before had promised revelation from beyond the grave, had instead delivered a corpse. Hercule Poirot alone appeared untouched by panic. He stood very still beside Sir Alistair Hawthorne's chair, his small, immaculate figure a study in composure amid disorder. His eyes moved rapidly, not resting on the dead man but sweeping the room, absorbing everything. Please, Poirot said quietly, yet with unmistakable authority. Mesdames, messieurs, remain where you are. His voice cut through the hysteria like a blade. Miss Violet Kerr clutched the back of her chair, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Edmund Blake had gone pale, his jaw working soundlessly. Colonel Vane stood rigid, fists clenched, as though bracing for artillery fire rather than murder. Madame Celestine had collapsed into her chair, one hand pressed dramatically to her throat. Lady Hawthorne sank to the floor beside her husband, her cries raw and uncontrolled. Poirot crouched, examining Sir Alistair more closely. The man's face was slack, his eyes half open and unseeing. There were no marks of violence, no sign of struggle. Death had come swiftly and quietly. Poirot inhaled almost imperceptibly. Again that faint odor, bitter almonds. He straightened at once. This room, Poirot said firmly, must not be disturbed further. Madame Celestine opened the curtains. Let us have light. Ghosts, I assure you, prefer the dark. Murderers do not. Madame Celestine hesitated, then obeyed. As the heavy drapes were drawn back, the weak lamplight of the street filtered in, stripping the room of much of its menace. With light came reality, and, with reality, fear took on sharper edges. Poirot turned to Colonel Vane. "Mon Colonel, you are a man of discipline. I ask you to assist me. Ensure that no one leaves the room." Vane nodded once, grateful, perhaps, for an order. Poirot then addressed the room. "Sir Alistair Hawthorne did not die of fright, nor of spirits. He was murdered, and unless I am very much mistaken, it was done during the darkness of the seance." Madame Celestine gasped. "Murder? Impossible." We were all seated. We were holding hands. Poirot's eyes flicked to her. "Indeed, madame, and that is precisely what makes this crime so interesting." Lady Hawthorne looked up sharply. "Are you saying one of us?" Poirot met her gaze steadily. "I am saying nothing yet, madame. I am observing." He walked slowly around the table. "No one," he continued, "left their seat. The doors were closed. The lights were extinguished. And yet Sir Alistair is dead. This, to the imagination, appears impossible. But to logic sees opportunity where imagination sees ghosts." He stopped behind Edmund Blake. He stood suddenly when the lights returned. "Monsieur." "Why?" Blake swallowed. Because he was dead. Anyone would." Poirot inclined his head. "True, anyone might, but not everyone does so at precisely the same instant." Blake flushed. "Are you accusing me?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Nan, I accuse no one." Yet, he moved on, stopping near Miss Kerr. "Mademoiselle, you were frightened from the start." She nodded frantically. "I hate such things. I didn't want to come." Sir Alistair insisted. "Why?" Poirot asked gently. She hesitated. Because he said it was important, that it concerned someone who had wronged him." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah!" Lady Hawthorne stiffened. Poirot returned to the body. He carefully examined Sir Alistair's hands, lips, and eyes. No discoloration yet, but poison. He suspected, acted swiftly. "Madame Celestine," Poirot said, "during the seance, you claimed the spirit spoke of betrayal." "Yes," she whispered. I felt it, or you suggested it." Poirot replied calmly. "Suggestion is a powerful thing. Tell me, were you aware of Sir Alistair's disputes?" Madame Celestine's eyes darted. "People tell me many things." "Indeed," Poirot said dryly. A sudden knock echoed from the front of the house. Poirot smiled slightly. "That," he said, "will be the police. I took the liberty of instructing the butler to summon them the moment trouble arose. One must always plan for the inevitable." Inspector Japp arrived minutes later, his expression grim but unsurprised. "Poirot," he said, surveying the scene. "Seance, eh? Always said they were trouble." Poirot gestured toward the body. "My dear Japp, here we have a murder that wishes very much to pretend it is a miracle." Japp raised an eyebrow. "Locked room." "Locked minds," Poirot corrected, as statements were taken. Poirot listened more than he spoke. Contradictions emerged, small, almost invisible cracks in the polished accounts. Edmund Blake claimed never to have touched Sir Alistair's glass, yet Miss Kerr insisted she saw him refill it earlier. Lady Hawthorne insisted her husband had been in excellent health, yet the servants later revealed he had complained of dizziness that very afternoon. Poirot's thoughts arranged themselves neatly. The darkness, the chanting dot, the faint metallic sound, masked by voices, the smell of almonds. When Japp finally turned to him, Poirot nodded once. "This crime," he said softly, "was committed not by spirits, but by intelligence and by someone who understood that fear is the finest cover for murder." He looked around the room, meeting each gaze in turn. "And I assure you," Poirot added, "before the spirits are summoned again, the truth will be." Part 4. Secrets in the Light. Morning light had a way of stripping the world of its disguises. The seance room, so carefully arranged to inspire awe and terror the night before, now looked merely theatrical. Velvet curtains, heavy with dust, candle wax pooled like frozen tears upon the table, incense sticks reduced to gray ash. In daylight, there were no spirits, only people, and people, Hercule Poirot reflected, were infinitely more complex. Sir Alistair Hawthorne's body had been removed at dawn. What remained was absence, a chair slightly askew, a faint outline where his weight had rested, and a silence that pressed upon the nerves. Poirot stood at the window, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the quiet street below. London went about its business as usual. Murder, it seemed, rarely interrupted the rhythm of life for long. Inspector Japp cleared his throat. Right then, statements in order. One at a time, Poirot turned, nodding. Excellent, mon ami. Truth, like order, prefers structure. They began with Lady Eleanor Hawthorne. She sat rigidly in an armchair, dressed now in severe black, though the hour for morning had barely begun. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry, as though she had exhausted her tears during the night. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, too controlled. My husband had enemies, she said immediately. Business rivals, disgruntled former partners. Anyone could have wished him harm. Poirot inclined his head. And yet, he said gently, only a handful were present last night. She stiffened. Are you suggesting? I suggest nothing, Poirot replied. I ask only for clarity. Your marriage, madam, was it happy? A flicker crossed her face, too quick for Japp, but not for Poirot. That is irrelevant. On the contrary, Poirot said softly, it is often essential. She looked away. We understood one another. Poirot made a small note. Understanding, he thought, was not affection. Miss Violet Kerr was next. She perched nervously on the edge of her seat, fingers twisting her handkerchief into a tight knot. I was Sir Alistair's secretary, she said, for 3 years. And devoted? No, Poirot asked. Her cheeks flushed. He was kind to me. Japp glanced up sharply. Kind how? Miss Kerr hesitated. He promised to help me. My family, we are not well off. Poirot's eyes softened. Promises, he murmured. They can be dangerous things. Edmund Blake entered with visible reluctance. He paced as he spoke, unable to sit still. I argued with Hawthorne, he admitted, about money, about control, but murder, no. Poirot observed him closely. You refilled Sir Alistair's glass earlier in the evening. Yes, at dinner, and after. Blake shook his head too quickly. No. Poirot said nothing, but the silence pressed harder than accusation. Colonel Rupert Vane's interview was brief. I disliked the man, he said bluntly. He ruined my regiment's pension fund, but I am no assassin. Madame Celestine was last. Without the candlelight, she looked older, lines etched deeply around her eyes. You orchestrated the séance, Poirot said. Every movement, every word. Yes, she admitted, but not the death. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, madame, did Sir Alistair consult you privately? She hesitated. He feared betrayal. From whom? She closed her eyes. From those closest to him. Poirot stood. The pieces were arranging themselves. Slowly, inexorably. He walked the room again, replaying the night in his mind. The darkness, the chanting, the momentary chaos. He examined the table carefully and found it barely visible in daylight. A faint scratch near Sir Alistair's place. Metal against wood. A ring, Japp suggested. No, Poirot said. A vial. They searched Sir Alistair's belongings. In the pocket of his dinner jacket, Poirot found a folded paper, a letter, half burned at the edges. If you do not stop, I will tell everything. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Blackmail, he thought. Always blackmail. He turned to Japp. Arrange for toxicology. Cyanide, I believe. Administered silently. Efficiently. Japp nodded grimly. You think one of them brought poison into a séance? Poirot smiled faintly. What better place to hide death than where people expect the unnatural? By afternoon, tensions had sharpened. Lady Hawthorne refused food. Blake smoked incessantly. Miss Kerr avoided everyone's gaze. Poirot gathered them together once more. The darkness, he said, was not an obstacle. It was a gift. The chanting masked sound. Fear masked movement. Someone broke the circle only for a moment. Long enough. Lady Hawthorne stood abruptly. This is cruelty. No, Poirot replied. It is truth, approaching As they dispersed, Poirot remained behind, staring at the empty chair. "The dead," he murmured, "do not speak, but they leave messages all the same." Part 5. The Reconstruction. Poirot believed that truth, like a mosaic, revealed itself only when each fragment was placed with care. The afternoon wore on in Madame Celestine's house, heavy with the weight of suspicion. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping insistently against the windows as if demanding entry. Inside, the suspects moved like uneasy ghosts, each haunted by thoughts they dared not voice. Poirot retired to the small drawing room, allotted to him and Inspector Japp. He closed the door, adjusted the curtains to admit precisely the amount of light he preferred, and sat. He removed a small notebook from his pocket and began to write not words, but symbols, arrows, and neat columns. Order first, meaning later. "Where do we begin?" Japp asked, lighting a cigarette. Poirot waved a hand. "At the beginning, mon ami, but not chronologically, psychologically." He rose and paced, hands clasped behind his back. The seance was theater, a performance designed to disarm, to distract, to frighten. But theater alone does not kill. Someone exploited the performance. He stopped. "Let us reconstruct." They returned to the seance room. Poirot insisted that every object be placed exactly as it had been the night before. Chairs, candles, table, nothing escaped his scrutiny. The servants complied under Japp's supervision. Poirot seated himself in Sir Alistair's chair. "Imagine," he said softly, "a man confident, skeptical. He laughs at spirits. He leans forward at the crucial moment." Japp frowned. Meaning access," Poirot replied. "The victim made himself vulnerable." Poirot asked Miss Kerr to sit where she had been seated, then Blake, then Lady Hawthorne, Colonel Vane, Madame Celestine. "Now," Poirot said. The lamps were dim. Shadows returned, though without the menace of the previous night. Poirot closed his eyes. He listened, not to sounds, but to memory. "The chanting," he murmured, "loud, rhythmic, perfect to mask a small sound, a vial opening, a spoon touching glass, a ring striking wood." Japp leaned closer. "You think the poison was dropped into his drink?" Poirot opened his eyes. "Nan, that would require too much certainty. To visible, know something more intimate." He reached for a glass placed before him. "A capsule," he said, "or liquid applied directly to the lips." Sir Alistair leaned forward. Someone close, very close, could have acted. Lady Hawthorne's breath caught. Poirot noticed. They restored the light. Poirot thanked them and dismissed everyone except Japp. Lady Hawthorne, Poirot said later, in private, loved her husband, in her way. But love does not exclude desperation. Japp nodded. Motives, strong. Inheritance. Fear of exposure. Poirot shook his head. Too obvious. And yet do not dismiss. Next came Edmund Blake. "You hated Sir Alistair," Poirot said calmly. "I did," Blake snapped, "but I didn't kill him." Poirot leaned forward. "You were blackmailed." Blake froze. "What?" "The letter," Poirot said. "You wrote a tour, received it. Financial irregularities, embezzlement. You needed Sir Alistair alive until the matter was resolved." Blake sagged. "He promised time." "Exactly," Poirot said softly. "A dead man grants no mercy." Miss Kerr wept openly when questioned again. "He said he would marry me," she confessed, "after Eleanor, after everything." Poirot's expression did not change. "Promises again." Madame Celestine, when pressed, admitted she had been paid generously to host a séance, to frighten him, she said, "not to kill." "Who paid you?" Poirot asked. She hesitated. "Lady Hawthorne." Japp stiffened. Poirot nodded slowly. "Fear was meant as leverage," he said, "not murder." As evening fell, Poirot retreated once more to think. He replayed every breath, every tremor. Then it struck him. Colonel Vane, the discipline, the restraint, the clenched jaw at the word betrayal. Poirot summoned him. "You lost your pension," Poirot said gently. "Because of Sir Alistair." Vane nodded. "Yes. And you possess military knowledge of fast-acting poisons." "Yes, yet you did not act." Vane looked up sharply. "No." Poirot believed him. "At midnight, Japp returned with toxicology results. Cyanide, he said. Exactly as you thought. Poirot smiled faintly. Then the method is confirmed. Only the hand remains. He gathered them all once more. The truth, Poirot said, is nearly complete. Tomorrow, I will ask you to relive the seance one final time. Fear rippled through the room. Poirot inclined his head. The past, he said softly, cannot be escaped, but it can be understood. Part 6. The second Seance night fell once more upon Madame Celestine's house, and with it returned an atmosphere thick with dread. If the first seance had been cloaked in curiosity and theatrical fear, the second was wrapped in something heavy. Everyone who gathered again around the circular table knew now that death was no illusion. It had sat among them, breathing their air, listening to their hearts race in the dark. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the seance room before the others arrived. He surveyed it with meticulous care, adjusting chairs by inches, straightening candles, ensuring symmetry. To an outsider it might have appeared a nervous habit, but for Poirot it was necessity. Disorder offended him, and tonight clarity demanded order. The same stage, he murmured, but a different performance. Inspector Japp entered quietly. You're certain this will work? Poirot nodded. Fear reveals what reason conceals. The guilty cannot relive the moment of their crime without betraying themselves. Japp glanced uneasily at the dark corners. Let's hope you're right. One by one, the suspects arrived. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne entered first, dressed once more in black, her veil lowered. She moved with mechanical precision, as though every step required conscious effort. Poirot observed the stiffness in her shoulders, the tension around her mouth. Miss Violet Kerr followed, pale and exhausted, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Edmund Blake came next, defiant but hot. Colonel Rupert Vane arrived punctually, his military bearing intact, though his face bore the strain of moral exhaustion. Madame Celestine was last. Without her flowing robes and excessive jewelry, she seemed diminished, stripped of mystique. Poirot gestured for them to sit. Tonight, he said calmly, there will be no spirits, no deception, only memory. Madame Celestine swallowed. Then why repeat this? Poirot smiled faintly. Because the truth is best revealed in familiar surroundings. The lamps were dimmed, extinguished entirely, but enough to allow shadows to form. Poirot wished to recreate the conditions without surrendering control. Place your hands upon the table, he instructed. Reluctantly, they complied. Poirot remained standing. During the first seance, he said, each of you believed yourselves watched by the dead. Tonight, understand this, you are watched only by the living and by yourselves. Silence pressed in. Poirot began. Sir Alistair Hawthorne was poisoned, he said evenly. Cyanide, administered swiftly, silently. The act took no more than a second. Miss Kerr shuddered. The darkness, Poirot continued, was essential. So was fear. Chanting masked sound. Suggestion, masked movement. Someone broke the circle. Lady Hawthorne's breath quickened. Poirot circled the table slowly, but not all of you could have done so. He stopped behind Edmund Blake. Monsieur Blake, your motive was financial, but you required Sir Alistair alive. Dead men forgive nothing. Blake sagged in relief. Poirot moved on. Miss Kerr's heart was broken. Yes, but you hoped. Hope delays murder. She burst into tears. Poirot nodded once and continued. Colonel Vane, your anger was righteous, but disciplined. You are not a man who strikes in the dark. Vane straightened, his eyes glistening. Poirot turned at last to Madame Celestine. You sowed fear. You did not deliver death. Madame Celestine covered her face. Only Lady Hawthorne remained. Poirot stopped before her chair. Madame, he said gently, you had the greatest motive of all. She did not look up. Your husband planned to expose you. Poirot continued. The affair, the theft, the deception. Her hands trembled. You paid Madame Celestine to frighten him, Poirot said. You believed fear would silence him, but fear failed. Lady Hawthorne whispered. You cannot prove. Poirot raised a hand. During the seance, Sir Alistair leaned forward. He laughed. You sat beside him. The room seemed to contract. You wore a ring, Poirot said. A hollow ring. inside a capsule of cyanide. Lady Hawthorne gasped. In the darkness, Poirot continued. You brushed his lips. A gesture of intimacy. A wife's touch. The capsule dissolved instantly. No, she cried. No. Poirot's voice softened. You did not intend to kill him. But desperation has no regard for dosage. Lady Hawthorne collapsed forward, sobbing. I only wanted it to stop, she whispered. The threats. The humiliation. Inspector Japp stepped forward. Poirot inclined his head. The seance, he said quietly, did not summon the dead. It revealed the living. Lady Hawthorne was led away. As the room emptied, Poirot remained behind, extinguishing the candles one by one. Ghosts, he murmured, are harmless things. It is people who must be feared. Part 7. The aftermath morning returned to Bloomsbury with an air of reluctant normality. Milk carts rattled over cobblestones. Shopkeepers raised their shutters, and the city resumed its endless rhythm. Yet, within Madame Celestine's house, time seemed to hesitate, as though unsure whether it was permitted to move forward after what had been revealed there. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne had been taken away before dawn. Her confession, quiet, broken, yet unmistakably complete, now lay in the hands of the law. Inspector Japp oversaw the formalities with practiced efficiency, but even he could not entirely suppress a sense of unease. There was something profoundly unsettling about a murder committed not in rage, but in fear. Hercule Poirot watched from the drawing-room window as the police carriage disappeared into the mist. His face was grave, his mustache carefully waxed as always, though his eyes betrayed fatigue. Justice, Japp said behind him, is rarely neat. Poirot turned. Nan, mon ami, but it must be precise. They sat together in silence for a moment, listening to the ticking of a clock whose measured rhythm felt almost indecent after the emotional chaos of the night before. The public will want explanations, Japp continued. Seance murders attract attention, superstition, scandal. Newspapers will feast on it. Poirot sighed softly. Then we must feed them facts, not fantasies. Later that morning, the remaining guests were summoned once more, this time not as suspects, but as witnesses to closure. Miss Violet Kerr entered first. She looked smaller somehow, her youthful confidence extinguished by grief and disillusionment. She clutched her handbag as though it were a lifeline. I keep thinking, she said quietly, that if I had spoken sooner, if I had not believed him. Poirot regarded her with gentle seriousness. Mademoiselle, belief is not guilt. You were deceived. That is not a crime. She nodded, tears spilling freely. I thought he loved me. Poirot did not contradict her. Love, he knew, was often real until it was no longer convenient. Edmund Blake arrived next. He seemed changed, older, perhaps stripped of arrogance. I suppose I should feel relieved, Blake said bitterly. Instead, I feel ashamed. Poirot inclined his head. Shame, he replied, is sometimes the beginning of wisdom. Blake hesitated. Will you tell them about the blackmail? Poirot considered. The law requires truth, but it does not demand unnecessary cruelty. Colonel Rupert Vane stood apart from the others, gazing at a faded military photograph on the wall. I wanted him to suffer, the colonel said quietly. I won't deny it, but not like that. Poirot met his gaze. There is a difference, mon colonel, between justice and vengeance. You understood it. That understanding saved you. Madame Celestine was last. Without her audience, she seemed diminished, her theatrical manner replaced by weary resignation. I thought fear would satisfy them, she said. I never imagined death. Poirot's voice was firm, but not unkind. One must be careful what one sells. Madame, fear is never content to remain a performance. By midday, the house was nearly empty. Servants moved quietly, packing away relics of the seance, candles, curtains, talismans, objects that had promised revelation but delivered ruin. Poirot walked once more into the seance room. Sunlight streamed in now, unchallenged by drapes or shadow. The round table stood bare. He touched its surface thoughtfully. An illusion, he murmured. Always an illusion. Inspector Japp joined him. Case closed. Poirot shook his head gently. A case ends, but its consequences do not. That afternoon, Poirot paid a final visit to Lady Hawthorne at the holding facility. She sat behind bars, her elegance gone, replaced by a fragile stillness. "I never meant to kill him," she said again. Poirot's expression was compassionate but unyielding. "Intent does not undo result." "Madame," she nodded slowly. "Do you believe I am evil?" Poirot paused. "I believe you are human, and humans, when cornered, are capable of terrible things." As he left, Poirot felt a familiar weight settle upon him, the weight of understanding, without absolution. That evening, Poirot returned to his flat. Hastings awaited him, eager for details. "A seance murder," Hastings exclaimed. "Extraordinary. Spirits and poison and hidden rings, like something out of a penny dreadful." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "And yet, mon ami, entirely ordinary. Greed, fear, secrets." Hastings frowned. "You don't sound pleased." Poirot removed his coat carefully. "Because the mystery is solved, but the sadness remains." He poured himself a small glass of tisane and sat. "People," Poirot said quietly, "are so eager to believe in ghosts. Perhaps because the truth that evil comes from ourselves is far more frightening." He gazed at the orderly room, restored once more to perfect balance. "The dead are silent," Poirot concluded. "It is the living who must learn to listen." Part 8. Ripples beyond the veil. Time, like a patient investigator, continued its quiet work in the days following Sir Alistair Hawthorne's death. Though the immediate mystery had been solved, its consequences spread outward in subtle, often invisible ripples, touching every life that had gathered around Madame Celestine's table. Hercule Poirot understood this well. For him, the resolution of a case was never the end of a story, only the moment when truth stepped out of shadow and allowed consequences to begin. The public story, the newspapers were merciless. Seance of death. Society figure poisoned during spirit ritual, proclaimed one headline. Another spoke darkly of curses, vengeful spirits, and forbidden knowledge. London, always eager for sensation, devoured the story with enthusiasm. Poirot read the articles with mild irritation as he sat in a quiet cafe near Russell Square. "They insist on ghosts," he muttered, "even when given facts." Inspector Japp, stirring his tea, chuckled. "Sells better than logic." "Logic," Poirot replied, "has never had good press." Behind the sensationalism, the official account was precise. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne was charged with murder. Madame Celestine faced charges of fraud and conspiracy. The seance was officially labeled a staged performance exploited for criminal opportunity. It was correct. It was incomplete. Miss Kerr's choice, Miss Violet Kerr, left London within a week. Poirot learned of this through a brief letter written in a careful, restrained hand. "I cannot remain where everything reminds me of what I believed and what was taken from me. I have accepted a position in Manchester. I will begin again." Poirot folded the letter thoughtfully. "Courage," he murmured. Not loud, but real. He knew Miss Kerr would survive. The wound was deep, but it had not poisoned her nature. Edmund Blake's reckoning. Edmund Blake's fall was quieter, but no less decisive. The financial irregularities Sir Alistair had threatened to expose came to light. Blake resigned from his company before he could be dismissed. Though spared prison, his reputation was irreparably damaged. Poirot encountered him by chance one evening, standing alone outside a club he no longer had the standing to enter. "I suppose you think I deserved it," Blake said bitterly. Poirot regarded him steadily. "Deserved is a dangerous word, monsieur. Consequence is more accurate." Blake nodded slowly. "I thought if Hawthorne died, my problems would vanish." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "they remained." Colonel Vane's closure. Colonel Rupert Vane returned to the countryside. He wrote to Poirot once, thanking him for restoring the difference between justice and revenge. The pension fund scandal was reopened. Though no full restitution was possible, Vane's name was publicly cleared. For Poirot, this mattered. Not all victories were loud. Some were simply correct. Madame Celestine. Unmasked Madame Celestine's trial attracted less spectacle than expected. Once stripped of her mysticism, she was revealed as a skilled illusionist and manipulator, not a prophet. Her followers vanished quickly. Belief, Poirot reflected, was fragile once confronted with fact. When Poirot visited her one last time, she looked at him with weary clarity. "You destroyed my livelihood," she said. Poirot shook his head. "No, madame, you destroyed it yourself. I merely removed the curtain." She laughed softly. "People wanted to be deceived." "Yes," Poirot agreed, "but wanting does not excuse harm." Lady Hawthorne's silence. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne spoke little after her arrest. Awaiting trial, she declined interviews and refused visitors. "Save one, Poirot. I dreamed," she told him, during their final meeting, that the table was empty. No candles, no hands, only silence. Poirot listened. "Do you know what frightened me most?" she continued. "Not prison, not shame, but the moment when I realized I had become capable of killing." Poirot's voice was quiet. "That moment, madame, is when innocence truly ends." She nodded once, as though accepting a verdict long overdue. Poirot reflects that evening. Poirot walked alone along the Thames. The water moved steadily, indifferent to tragedy or triumph. The veil, Poirot thought, is not between life and death. It is between truth and illusion. He considered how easily fear had been cultivated, how readily darkness had been accepted as proof of the supernatural. People, he knew, preferred mystery to responsibility. As the lights of London shimmered on the river's surface, Poirot felt neither satisfaction nor regret, only clarity. The case had not ended with a dramatic arrest or a clever speech. It had ended with understanding, and for Hercule Poirot, that was always the true resolution. Part 9. The last puzzled days stretched into weeks. Yet, for Hercule Poirot, the case continued to occupy his meticulous mind. Though Lady Eleanor Hawthorne had been detained and Madame Celestine's deception laid bare, Poirot knew that in every crime there exists a final puzzle piece that must be placed with care, lest the picture remain incomplete. He invited Inspector Japp to his flat for a detailed review. "Mon ami," Poirot began, pouring 2 glasses of hot tisane, "we have resolved the matter publicly, yet my conscience requires completeness. There is one element, subtle, often overlooked by those who desire only a tidy conclusion." Japp raised an eyebrow. "Another twist." "Not twist," Poirot corrected. "Clarity." They spread the case files across Poirot's small dining table. Statements, letters, reports, newspaper clippings, and the toxicology report. Poirot scanned each with precision, noting minor inconsistencies invisible to the untrained eye. "Notice," Japp Poirot pointed, "how Sir Alistair's glass was placed during the séance. It was always at a slight angle. No one noted it at the time, yet it was significant. It allowed a precise action without detection." Japp frowned. "You mean the poison administration?" "Oui. But more than that. Observe the timing of the candle flickers. The sequence of rapsta, very pattern of the supposed spiritual communication. It created a psychological rhythm, a distraction. Only someone who had rehearsed or observed closely could exploit it." Poirot's eyes sparkled as he continued. "Now, the letter, the blackmail note, it's half-burned. Condition is instructive. It indicates urgency and anxiety. Whoever destroyed it did not intend for it to survive as evidence, but wished to retain secrecy. Yet the fact that a portion remained reveals the skill of the hand that attempted concealment." Japp leaned in. "So Lady Hawthorne isn't the only one involved?" Poirot shook his head. "She is culpable in intent, yes, and acted out of desperation. But others had influence, whether through omission, facilitation, or knowledge. This is where human nature complicates legality." Poirot then moved to the testimony of the servants. He noted subtle cues, the trembling of the footman, the delayed response of the maid, the misplaced candlestick in the initial chaos. "These are small, mon ami, almost imperceptible," he said. "Yet they tell a story of fear, of instinct, of complicity, even when unrecognized." Hours passed as Poirot reconstructed sequences in meticulous detail, each fragment of evidence aligned into a coherent tableau. He paced the room, gesturing at imagined movements around the table, rehearsing the psychological tension of the second séance. The subtle shifts in each participant's posture, the variations in breathing and reaction that revealed more than any confession. Observe the rhythm, Poirot continued, the timing of the knocks, the pauses between syllables of the chant, every second accounted for by human response. A ghost could not have created such predictable variables. Only the living mind could. Japp shook his head. By the time you finish, Poirot, you'll have every heartbeat and breath accounted for. Precisely, Poirot said, and in these small details lie the truth. Not the spectacle, not the headlines, not the theatrics, but the undeniable facts that reveal motive, opportunity, and method. Poirot then examined his final set of observations. The subtle interplay of relationships, the quiet desperation in Miss Kerr, the unspoken tension between Lady Hawthorne and her husband, the restrained indignation of Colonel Vane, the resigned compliance of Madame Celestine, each contributed a psychological layer that made the crime possible and explainable. Notice, Poirot said softly, how human desire intersects with circumstance. Lady Hawthorne acted from fear and self-preservation. Blake, Kerr, Vane, Celestine, they each played parts in a delicate dance, conscious or unconscious, that created the environment for tragedy. He paused, fingers steepled. It is not sufficient to arrest one person. One must understand the web. Otherwise, one mistakes a single thread for the entire tapestry. Poirot then turned to Japp with a glint in his eye. There is one final puzzle, one question unanswered by law, by testimony, or by observation, and it is the question that gives this case its lasting intrigue. Japp leaned forward. What is it, Poirot? Why, Poirot said softly, did Sir Alistair laugh just before his death? Japp blinked. Laugh? Oui, not a nervous laugh, nor a reaction to fear. A brief, knowing laugh. The last thing he experienced. Perhaps the last act of consciousness before the poison took effect. It is crucial because it confirms he perceived the action, recognized the danger, yet could not prevent it. Japp exhaled slowly. Terrifying. Terrifying, yes, Poirot agreed. And enlightening. For in that instant, the human mind, sharp and aware, confronts mortality while understanding the perpetrator. The living, the knowing, and the complicit converged. Hours more passed in analysis, as Poirot mapped the psychological, physical, and temporal layers. He reconstructed the minute-by-minute sequence of the second seance, identifying not only who touched what and when, but also which fears and desires influenced every gesture, every glance, every tremor of a hand. Every moment of hesitation contributed to the precise unfolding of the tragedy. Poirot leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. The human mind is intricate, precise, and fallible, and in its fallibility, it reveals everything. When he finally rose, he felt a rare satisfaction, not that the case was closed, but that it was fully understood. The last puzzle piece fit perfectly, a silent, invisible capstone atop a structure of careful observation and reasoning. Mon ami Poirot, said to Japp, one may close the case, but the understanding remains. That is the true reward for the detective mind. Japp chuckled. You always make it sound so philosophical. Philosophy, mon ami, Poirot said with a faint smile, is simply the art of seeing truth where others see only shadows. And in the quiet of his flat, with London lights twinkling like scattered candles beyond the window, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied sigh. The last puzzle was complete, and the picture, in all its human complexity, lay fully revealed. Part 10. Closure and reflection, with the last of the minor pieces examined and every subtle motion, gesture, and hesitation accounted for. Hercule Poirot prepared for the final moments of the case. It was not merely the conclusion of a criminal investigation. It was the culmination of understanding human nature in all its complexity. The day was bright, yet the shadows of recent events lingered in Madame Celestine's now empty house. Candles long extinguished and curtains drawn aside, the room stood as a silent witness to tragedy, revelation, and consequence. Poirot gathered all the remaining parties, those who had survived the ordeal and remained in London. He addressed them with the same calm authority that had guided him through every step of the investigation. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, "the events that unfolded here were no mere accident, no random act of fate. They were the product of human intention, of desires and fears intertwined with circumstance. The death of Sir Alistair Hawthorne has concluded, but the lessons endure." He spoke carefully, reflecting on the consequences for each individual. Miss Violet Kerr, though scarred emotionally, had begun a new life elsewhere. Edmund Blake faced the ramifications of financial misdeeds. Colonel Rupert Vane had restored his honor. Madame Celestine's illusions had been unmasked, and Lady Eleanor Hawthorne faced justice for her desperate act. Poirot emphasized the delicate balance of justice and mercy, and the importance of understanding intent as well as action. He explained how fear, desperation, and opportunity had combined to create the perfect, if tragic, storm. Each person listened, some with relief, others with shame, yet all with a new understanding of their own roles in the events that had transpired. As the gathering concluded, Poirot remained alone in the room, walking slowly to the round table where the seance had taken place. He traced the polished surface with his fingertips, recalling each subtle movement, each human reaction that had contributed to the case's resolution. He reflected on the nature of truth. It was not always dramatic or obvious. Often, it was hidden in the smallest detail, revealed only to those who observed with patience and precision. The human mind, capable of brilliance and folly alike, had been both the instrument and the subject of revelation. Poirot considered the city outside, alive with indifference to the tragedies and revelations contained within the quiet house. London moved on, unknowing and untroubled, while he alone carried the knowledge of the full tapestry of human behavior that had played out within these walls. In the quiet, Poirot allowed himself a moment of personal reflection. His work was never simply about solving crimes. It was about understanding people, the subtle interplay of character, motive, and circumstance. It was about illuminating the shadows where fear and desire mingle, revealing the intricate patterns of human life. As evening fell, Poirot returned to his flat. Hastings awaited him, eager for stories, yet aware that some truths could only be experienced in contemplation, not in words. Poirot spoke little of the final details, choosing instead to share the philosophical insights gained from the case. He discussed the fragility of belief, the dangers of manipulation, and the necessity of observation. Hastings listened attentively, absorbing lessons that were as much about life as they were about crime. Finally, Poirot sat in his armchair, hands folded, eyes closed. The case was complete. The puzzles had been solved. Justice, in its measured and deliberate form, had been administered. And yet, the human heart, with all its complexity, remained a mystery, one that Poirot would continue to study with relentless care. The candles on the table were extinguished, leaving only the faint glow of the city beyond the window. Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction, not from victory, nor from public acclaim, but from the profound understanding that comes from seeing clearly the intricate web of human thought and action. He allowed himself a final thought, that even in the darkness, even in moments of fear and desperation, truth could be discerned by those with patience, intellect, and an unwavering commitment to observation. And with that, Hercule Poirot, the little gray cells fully engaged and at peace, looked forward to the next challenge that would test both mind and understanding, knowing that, in every mystery, the heart of the human condition awaited discovery. Order restored, Lady Hawthorne is arrested, and the truth comes to light. Poirot reminds everyone that there are no mysteries beyond human understanding, only facts waiting to be arranged. As he leaves, Poirot reflects that reason will always triumph over illusion.